joining us. Kelly, good to see you as well. And Craig, really happy to have you for the first time. Hopefully, it won't be the last time, but we'll see how the conversation goes when watching you. While I am doing all that, I hope everybody else is liking the show, subscribing, hitting the notification bell. That way, you get your email every day that we go live, which is, of course, every day. If y'all have any thoughts, questions, or comments, by all means, put them up in the comment bar. We can put them up here and discuss them and engage them directly. We today are talking about the mental side of peak performance. And as Sean likes to say, in anything peak performance, it's 90% mental and the other 10% is mental. So I imagine he'll have a number of things to say today. Any thoughts or questions before we dive into it? No? Okay. Well, then I'm going to actually hand it off to you, Sean, as to your initial definition, because you have a really solid one of mental peak performance. What do you think? What would you define as mental peak performance?
Well, I don't know if I've got a good definition because actually today I thought we were talking about physical performance.
That was yesterday.
I
He's
thought we were
losing it.
continuing on.
Not quite.
Sometimes I don't know who's going to be here, and sometimes I don't know the topic. So mental, I think you defined it for me. The importance of mental discipline, mental consistency, mental peak performance, I think is really how you view how you're using your mental capacity. So if someone is considering that 20% mental and 80% physical is the way to run their life, well, that's a different way than I run my life. I consider it as 90% is mental. And I know it's kind of a goofy little statement, but I've said that thousands of times to hundreds of athletes and people who stop me on the street and ask me kind of a similar question. I really believe that the entire game is a mental game. And as said yesterday during the physical peak performance episode, my body will do what my brain tells it to do, and it can just freaking shut up. So I don't want to hear the whining other than danger signals. You know, the oil signal is in the red, we'll call it. I just don't care too much about my body other than looking after it so that it can perform. When I am training, when I am racing, when I'm executing against something of importance, and by importance, I mean important to me, and then we can subset that into important for the team. Well, if it's important enough for me to start ignoring my body, well, that's what I do. And my mind will tell it to be quiet and get on with the task at hand. So my mental game, my mental life is predicated on if I need to be successful in something, I'll drive it with my brain.
There you go. Let's go down the table then and get your first thoughts um, on mental peak performance. Jim, what are your first thoughts on how much the mental side of plays into the game?
Couple of initial thoughts. First is that that mental peak performance has to be at your mental peak performance, not necessarily compared to everyone else, because that'll pull you into a pit you don't want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about Sean's definition there, the physical side and the mental side. I'm not 100% sure they're separate, able to be separated. They seem like concurrent activities to me. So I guess my personal philosophy there is not maybe similar to the 90-10, but also concurrently 90-10 on both the physical and the mental side concurrently.
Hmm. Interesting. Kelly, what about your thoughts?
I think having the right mental mindset is crucial, is the foundation.
Mm.
How you wake up in the morning, the thoughts that you let run through your head when you're doing activities, the preparation, the body can't go where the mind hasn't. So, not even so much while you're doing the activity or completing the task, is what are you thinking about leading up to starting the task and completing the task? Are you visualizing success? Are you visualizing the goal? So those, I think of mindset as a lot, or is very similar to visualization as well.
Mm.
And I mean the 90-10, I'd have to agree. So it's mental. There's so much to it that's mental.
And Craig, you want to round us out? What are your thoughts on the mental side of the house?
Yeah, I really agree with Sean's comment, especially or the way he's describing that he doesn't really care about his body in a sense. I think my definition of mental performance would be the ability to allocate your attention at any given time, which is a lot harder than it sounds. And especially if you're doing something that's really difficult, the ability to recognize that you are in pain, but to separate pain from suffering. So you can feel those whatever feedback sensations you have from whatever you're doing. It might be hypoxia, it could be the pain from a difficult workout, it could be anything else. And then to continue on whatever path you need or call in whatever mental skills or skill sets you need to move forward, but to clearly know the difference between pain and suffering and to distinguish between those two so that you can control your attention at any given moment and move forward with what you're doing.
Sean, you got a thought on that?
I do. I'm glad that I didn't come in hard, but I came in kind of generalistic hard. And I wanted to kind of throw it out there to see what the panel would do with it. And great job by everyone. And now that we're at, I can add a little bit of nuance to my statement. And Craig, you're just going to have to bite down on your mouthpiece for about a minute because I'm going to be fanboying about building the elite. So I just came out of my live IG chat where someone was asking me a couple of questions, and I said, you know what, tune into the podcast that we're going to be doing here in about 20 minutes where we're going to have ... And so I actually flicked through and showed people some of the content, and I said, hey, listen, before I knew anything about anything regarding building the elite, I saw the book online and I thought, I'm going to check that out. I like reading, I like learning. And as I flicked through the book, as I've said in the past in a couple of live podcasts, those two guys wrote the book that I wanted to write, except they probably wrote it better than I would have been able to. I'm such a big fan of the book that I talk about it on a regular basis. If any young guy, and I'm almost going to quote myself, if any young guy hits me in my Instagram DMs, excuse me, and says, hey, Sean, I want to be a quadruple sniper and I want to be a 47 times tier 1 JTF2 operator, how can I be so mega? And I'll say, one of the first things I'll say is go buy Building the Elite book and read it and then get back to me. And while you're doing that, go follow Building the Elite online on their Instagram account and read at least a year of their content. And if you're really in the game, you'll read all of it and then get back to me. What you guys have done is you put out almost a blueprint for anyone who wants to be really in the game of life, not just the game of being a special operator, not just being in the game of ... It's a blueprint for the game of life. And so when I was throwing out the verbiage of, 90% mental, 10% mental, go hard, ignore your body, all of that good stuff, I know full well the nuance within the book that states, well, that's maybe not the best idea. There's more nuance to it than that. You have to look for the certain symptoms. You have to look for the certain signals. You have to drive your body and understand the difference between pain and suffering and etc. And so my general statement has got me to now where the game of mental performance is a nuanced game the further you get into it. At the start, you've kind of got to set some general objectives for yourself. You've got to give yourself some milestones or events that you're moving towards and set a mental goal, as it were, and then use the mental game to get you there. But along the way, if that's only a month out, you'll learn a few things. But if the event is a year out, you'll learn more things. But if the event is life, what you're going to do is learn the nuance of the mental game. If anyone's listening to this right now and you've never considered how to apply mental into your peak performance, start now and make it a lifelong journey, because 10, 20 years from now, you might have the privilege or the luxury of being able to understand the nuance of applying the mental game to peak performance. And it will be the best gift you ever give to yourself by starting now to really entrench your mindset into seeking a good mental mindset. You're
I'm-
welcome.
The funny thing is that we were just discussing before you jumped on, Sean, about how Craig should get his book and just have it on his hand and be like, "Oh,
like,
you
put
know
it-
this book right here." And
And then you did it for
Dude,
him.
I'm
And you
out here
did
doing it
us.
for
That's
you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Craig, got any thoughts on anything Sean just hit there?
I mean, yeah, I don't want to echo it too much, but yeah, like with the book, we put 7 years into writing a textbook. It's not an airport book. There's a lot of information in there that's very dense. And yeah, when it comes to the mental side of it, like everyone else is going to echo, the mind drives the body, and I think it was someone else who said like your body will go as far as your mind will take you. So it's hard to separate any of them. Like you can't really pull mental function or like mental rationality from emotional behavior because we use emotions to underpin rational decision making. And you can't really pull physical health from mental health either because the function of your organs is driven by your physical health and your brain is an organ. So your mental performance is related to your physical health as well. And they're all intertwined. You can't really separate any of them.
That's a great point. Jim, you got any points to add on any of that?
Yeah, I'm torn, I guess, between the mental aspect of physical performance. I'm also thinking that we're probably going to go down the path here of the mental aspect of academic performance or the mental aspect of mental performance, something that's not necessarily physical. So I'm interested to see how we go with that, but echo all the comments so far.
Raj, Kelly, got anything to add?
When I was thinking about this topic, it took me back when I think of peak performance. One thing I think of is the Blue Angels, the Navy Blue Angels, and when they do their shows. And I was able to be a part of the main steering committee when we hosted the Blue Angels here in our area. And one thing that really stuck out with me when we were prepping is saying, if you see some of the other air show pilots sitting in their car, closing their eyes, doing the moves, they're mentally going through their performance ahead of time to build those neural pathways and to build in the, hey, this is how it goes. And they have to mentally practice because it's really hard to practice an air show before you actually do it. So I just think of that as like that peak performance and how athletes visualize things and how impactful it is to really get down to the nitty gritty of the visualization. Maybe not just standing on the podium, but it's like, how are you kicking that goal? How are you flying the plane? How are you, hitting the trails, whatever it may be. So that's where I think of that mental, and what I was alluding to earlier too, is the preparation piece, not so much even during the activity.
Great. Yeah. It's funny you bring that up because the first image I got when you said visualization, you guys ever seen the movie Cool Runnings? When they're all in the
Yes.
bathtub and they're all sitting there just doing the turns.
Yeah.
That's what kicked in my head as you were talking about visualization. Now I have a really good comment on this, but are there any other thoughts before I jump into this, Sean?
Yeah, I'd like to play off of what Kel just said, and it's in respect to visualization, and it's a bigger topic than just visualization. But I'll start with the visualization piece. So in 1989, I was in the Skyhawks, which is the Canadian National Parachute Demonstration Team for the Canadian Armed Forces. And so I've been to a boatload of air shows. And actually that year we did over 50 air shows across North America. And so I've been around lots of pilots. I've seen them do their visualization for sure. But I only saw their visualization once I realized that they were visualizing. Because here's the thing, back in 1989, it wasn't a freaking word. No one chirped about visualization. It wasn't on all the books, on all the magazines. And so it was just not a word that was used. And so I was in a lift. I was down in Southern California at our jump camp on a bird going up. And I saw one of the team members who was a permanent staff member, a trainer. I saw him squatted down on the floor of the bird, and he was doing his movements. He was eyes closed, doing his visualization. I looked over and I was like, what is Denis doing over there? And I watched him for about 30 seconds and I thought, I see what he's doing. Okay, check. That's what I'm going to do. So that's the moment that I started visualizing. And I didn't really know what I was doing other than going through my routines. But with my eyes closed, I started visualizing what I should be doing next, etc. And so as I built that out, I then incorporated that into the rest of my life, into tier one, and then into all of the athletes that I've worked with, asking them to, before they go to bed at night, do 10 runs on that world championship course, eyes closed, feeling the wind on your hair, hearing, smelling, tasting, all of the things. And so I talked about that over the years after I saw it that first time. But the only reason I saw it that first time is because I was in a group of super freaks. I was surrounded by high performers. If I hadn't have been around high performers, I wouldn't have seen that. And there's a difference between reading about it in a magazine and being right in the middle of it, surrounded by high performance visualizers. And so for peak performance in respect to mentality, if you want to improve your mentality or change your mentality or approach your mentality in a different way, start looking around for a clan or group or tribe or whatever you want to call it. Get involved with a crew that is up their game, has performed to a degree where they have learned the lessons, made all of the mistakes, improved their sequence of events, and now can pass on information either directly or through osmosis. And you can either ride their coattails or be directed directly by them to improve your mental game. In order to get better, you've got to be around better sometimes. So another thing that I'd just like to mention real quick in respect to mentality. This morning, I dropped off our vehicle at our local mechanic shop, trying to get a hitch on the back of it. And then I took my mountain bike for a ride through the trails. As I was about to leave, one of the guys there said, "Hey, Sean, I got a question for you." Yeah, shoot. I'm only doing 25 push-ups and I can't seem to do any more. And I said, "Why's that?" "Well, I'm at a plateau." "Oh yeah, why at the plateau?" "You can't do 26? And he said, "No, I can only do 25 and then I fail." And I said, "Have you tried to do 26? How many times have you tried?" And he said, "Lots, but I just can't seem to make it. Do you got any tips?" I said, "Yeah, you don't have any conviction." And he was kind of offended. Not offended, but he was a bit put off, I'll say that. And he said, "What do you mean I don't have any conviction?" I said, "You don't have enough conviction. You haven't prioritized 26 enough. You've only prioritized 25. And he said, "I can't do 26. And I said, "I'll guarantee you that I'll get you to a land speed record of hitting 27 if I put a gun to your head." That's called conviction. You just haven't prioritized enough what you say you want to do. You need an external factor like me to say you can do it. You don't need that. You just need you to tell you that 27 is possible and it's mandatory. So we had the little conviction talk, and then I pieced out. And as I was going, he said, "You know what? I don't even know why I asked you, because I knew you were going to say that." "Yeah, that's why you asked me, because you needed to hear it." And so that's the way of the world, man. I think you either know or you don't know. And if you don't know and you ask someone, they tell you, "Yeah, you can," well, it's time to get on with the program.
It's a solid point. I'm going to go down the panel again. Kelly, got any thoughts on that?
When you were saying the push-ups thing, it made me think of when I'm doing workout and I have a trainer and I'll be doing reps and she's like, "Okay, 2 more." And if I start struggling, she just like puts her fingers under the bar like I'm doing a bench press. It's 2 fingers. It's not actually physically helping me, but there's something in my brain where it's like that mental of like, "Yep, you got it. Yep, you can do 2 more." And what a crazy thing that is, just to mentally say, like how in opposite, defeatist. "I can't hit 26 push-ups." Really? Really? Because you've told yourself you can't. What is that saying? Whether you say you can or you
Whether you
can't,
think
you're
you
right.
can or you can't,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah.
You're right. And Sean, kudos to you for saying it out loud, because you're right. We may know it in our head, but we also defeat it in our head, our mental game, our mental blocks. And then somebody else says it and we're like, "Well, duh, I knew that. I knew you were going to say it, but I just needed somebody else to say it." The mind is a wild thing.
Indeed, it is. Craig, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was thinking of Sean's thing about the push-ups. There's this guy, Roger Sparks, he was a Marine recon instructor and then became a PJ, wrote a book about some of his experiences in combat. He lives in Alaska now. He's an amazing guy. And throughout his book, he references Bushido, or like the philosophy of samurai warriors. and the book Hagakure, I think. And there's this idea that he references a lot, that a person's usefulness is relative to their desperation, or that courage is the same thing as desperation. So if you think of like that stereotype of a woman lifting a car off their child, like that woman's courage in that moment is her desperation. And when we have someone like this guy who can't figure out how to do 25 push-ups, like there's just nothing there that is driving him to do that. Like he does not have the desperation in that moment to push himself to do that. It's a curious thing. It's hard to unravel that in some people. One of the things we screen for, like when we look at clients, one-on-one clients, if we take them on or not, is we ask them what are the most difficult things they've faced in their life up to this point, and what their explanatory style is, like what the story is, and then how they place themselves in that narrative, whether they see themselves as being the driver of that experience or like the passive bystander or victim of that experience. And we can get a sense of how they're going to approach things, and whether they have that internal drive or that desperation to do that kind of work, because it's really hard to tell from the outside. Like if you were looking at that guy, you'd probably think he could do 50, 60 push-ups, like easily. And then you might see someone who's just stuck at 25 for a reason that lives only in their head. But I think that what Roger Sparks was saying and quoting the samurai guys was that some of that is just tantamount to desperation. Like how badly do you want or need to do this thing? And what is the reason that lives in your head that supports it?
Is it? Solid point. Jim, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'm trying to hold back audible laughter just with Sean threatening his mechanic there. So, just on the
We've known
visualization.
each other for a while.
Yeah, that probably happened. The visualization thing, Sean, you mentioned in the 80s. I got into sports, I guess, in the 90s, and visualization was always a thing, but it wasn't really good. It was in its infancy, and it wasn't until I went to the Timberwolves game. It was Kevin Garnett, and just on your story of watching a guy in a plane do that, I watched Kevin Garnett stand in the middle of a basketball court and just do weird things, and I was wondering what he's doing. And then it was kind of at that moment that I understood visualization as well. And the aspect that really hit home with me was doing it in the environment. You don't necessarily need to shoot a basketball or jump out of a plane. You can visualize basketball or a plane, but take it to that next level and visualize what you're doing in that environment, the sensory stimuli there, and the smells and the sounds, and just really took it to the next level there. So, and taking that and applying it to anything. And I did mention academics there too. I find myself getting stuck when I need to write a paper or something like that and get this mental block. But you can visualize those things that aren't physical as well, and it really applies to anything to get you on that path.
Interesting. I like that a lot. Any other thoughts on that before I got to jump on this comment right here? But everybody's good. Cool. So Dave Kervin jumps in here. He says, I really think visualizing outcomes is a key component to achieving any peak performance. Any physical challenge I've ever taken on, I've spent a large amount of time visualizing processes and outcomes. Correction, not necessarily peak performance, but any performance. And I think that's a great point, is that the ability to visualize in general is great. But I think that there's a piece that Jim just enlightened to, was the fact that being able to visualize the environment you're going to be in. So if you need to write a test and you're just visualizing the test itself, I don't know if that will help for sure, but it would help more to visualize yourself in the room you're going to be in the style of desk you're going to be in, what type of pencil you're going to have in your hand, that kind of thing, so you can piecemeal it out and you can sense all of it. You think that's a better trait to use, or do you think it is kind of superfluous in just the concept of visualizing? Craig, I'm going to go to you first. What do you think?
No, the more accurately you can simulate your performance environment in your visualization, the more effective your visualization practice will be, because any skill is context specific. So like if you've only practiced basketball in a quiet driveway, you've become good at quiet driveway basketball, but that's not going to be the same thing as doing that same shot in front of thousands of people who are mad at you on Twitter. Like we joked about the Cool Runnings thing, they've done studies on that. They used kayakers where they had them do different levels of visualization, where some just sat there and they just did their visualization like sitting in a chair in their normal clothes, and they had other guys put on their full whatever it is they wear where they're kayaking. And then they had others sit in their boat in their house or the garage or whatever. And the closer they got to mimicking their performance environment when they did the visualization, the better their performance. Researchers use an acronym PETLEP. It's not a very good acronym, but it's physical, environment, task, timing, learning, emotion, and perspective. And those are all of the factors you want to try to integrate into whatever it is you're doing when you visualize something. So don't just imagine like the skill in isolation, but what are you wearing? How do you feel? What time of day is it? You know, like what is the sequence of events that led to it? Yeah, I think someone mentioned smell. All of those factors will make that skill practice in your head more relevant or context specific. So it will fit into that lock, like you're making a better key to fit into a lock that you'll need to unlock later. And the more accurately you simulate it, the better it's going to work in the future.
I like that key unlock. Kelly, got any thoughts?
Lots of them. So interestingly, I went to a concert last night. Any of you familiar with Lindsey Stirling, the violinist? Phenomenal. The athleticism while she was playing a violin is insane. But anyway, she also brought up, she had some inspirational stories. And one of them, she talked about this crystallization of water experiment by Masaru Emoto. I might be pronouncing it wrong. And he basically took vials of water and put them in different environments and then looked at them at a magnified level. And as they crystallized, the water that was in a positive environment with like positive words spoken around the water and positive words written on the vial versus negative environments and negative words being spoken around, the crystals, the water would crystallize in positive environments in these symmetrical, beautiful snowflake type shapes. And in the negative environment, they were jagged shapes and just not symmetrical at all. And she said, and what are humans? We're 60% water. So the mentality that you create really impacts you even at levels that you can't even process or understand or recognize. And I think of peak performance as being healthy. And Sean, you mentioned between suffering and pain, or you broke that down. Again, this is anecdotal, but I look at people around me that are more negative or have more of that passive role in their life. Everything happens to them. I feel like they're always sick, or they get sick more frequently. And people who are not don't tend to succumb to the change of season bugs or that sort of, so even at that level, we talk about peak performance. Well, in order to have peak performance, you have to have a baseline of healthy habits and behaviors in order to get to that next step. So I thought that was fascinating to me, is even something as simple as positive thoughts and being surrounded by your right tribe, clan, group of people really does have an impact more than you recognize.
That's a great point. An interesting research. I'm going to have to look that up. Jim, you got any points to add on? Oh, you're muted. Hold on. There you go. We're good.
Sorry.
I got you.
Yeah, very, very good point there, Kelly. That internal monologue is unbelievably important. I succumbed to that early in my career there, and Sean, I'll credit you for that. I was doing my training, and I'm like, what are these guys from your unit going to think of me? Can I be as good as them? Will I ever be as good as them? And that was my internal monologue, until I started thinking, more positive thoughts, and you can keep running, you can do the next mile, you can do the next 10 miles. So, great point there. That Mr. Rogers thing, I think it was, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Thinking positively makes a huge difference. So, great point there.
Mm-hmm. Sean, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I do. The peak mentality, peak performance mentality. I think that there's a couple of ways that you can use it. So this is the way I've used it in the past anyway for lots of athletes. I make their lives a bit hellacious. So I get them to a point where they can peak perform, and then I make them peak perform. And what do I mean by that? So I'll give an example. Sometimes some of my athletes had to fly overseas to really hot locations called not Canada, where it's usually pretty cold. And so they'd bounce over to these countries and there'd be a delta of, sometimes 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit between the time they took off till the time they landed in that particular country. And then several days later, they're racing at a world championship for 24 hours or whatever the case is. And so it's my job to prepare them on all fronts. And one of those fronts is to get them used to the heat, to the humidity. And so we'll start that process months before they go to a world championship. I am thinking of an athlete right now that I had ride on a trainer inside his very small bathroom without the fan on, without any fans blowing on him, so that his core temperatures were being compromised, so that his mind was being compromised, so his body was being compromised, and he did not like it. It was the hardest session that he's ever done in his mind. And so he got to learn how to work through that process. And then when he went to the event, he thought, this event is way easier than that bathroom moment. And that's what you got to do sometimes, is push yourself to a degree where the thing that you're about to peak perform into is way easier than the things that you've been doing in training. And you've got to be able to rely on that. You've got to have it in your back pocket to consider, I've done harder. I think that that's one of the critical sentences that you can state in your life. If you ever have the luxury of doing something mega hard that leaves such a mark on you that you can never forget it for the rest of your life, congratulations. You've now got a tool in your back pocket called, I've done harder things. It can't be any worse than ... which is exactly what that athlete did. As he was performing in that moment, he was having to adjust his mentality to become extremely robust. But then he got to take that moment and use it as a scalpel in a world championship race. So it's a double peak performance, in my opinion.
That brings up an interesting thought in my head is the delineation between what is actually harder versus what you think is harder. Because who knows whether, like, I don't know if you actually track the metrics on it there, Sean, was it a higher humidity level? Was it hotter? Was it et cetera, et cetera, in the bathroom than when he was at the race? Was that
Yeah,
a physical thing?
I had him put in a weather station in his bathroom. I knew exactly what the conditions were. And by the way, I knew exactly what he was doing every minute of that ride because all of my athletes were responsible to report to me every single day with wattage. So I knew precisely, wattage is the gold measurement of workload output, et cetera, et cetera. So I had him on heart, but I also had him on wattage. And so I spent, a lot of years analyzing a lot of deep data in respect to my athletes. So that 6-hour hellacious ride in his little bathroom, I knew precisely what was going on with that guy in that moment.
It's interesting to me to put your own self into a position that is going to be that much more difficult. It makes perfect sense, obviously, to then be able to refer to it later on in life and through more difficult things. I remember listening to a Jocko podcast at one point where they were talking about the fact that when he was running the training cell for the SEALs that went through his training programs were saying that combat was easier than his training programs. And he was like, yeah, it's supposed to be. There was no question about it. I think that's quite a fascinating point. You guys got any thoughts before we move on? Craig, you got anything?
No, nothing to add to that.
Okay. Jim, good to go?
All good.
Kelly, good to go? All right. So I want to kind of come back to the conviction, desperation.
Sorry, is that
No,
because
yeah.
everyone's still scratching their heads as to how cruel Sean is?
I don't
Oh
think
no, it's a
anybody-
brilliant training process.
I think so.
Totally agree with it. Yeah.
I'd love for some pushback. It'd be a great conversation.
Did you track core temp when you were doing that?
Dude, I wish I could have. And so, funnily enough, I'm not in the coaching game anymore. So if anyone's out there listening to this thinking that I'm still in the job of making world or helping to facilitate world champions, I'm not. I stopped that over a year ago to come and do freaky little podcasting stuff quit my job to come and do this. What the heck? But when I was in the game, I was really trying to figure out how to incorporate core temperature in the real-time readings. And at that time, I didn't really see any tools out there. But funnily enough, just at the start of this week, one of my athletes in Australia, who I coached for about 10 years-ish, he sent me a little, some information on something called Core, I believe it is, that you can like put on almost like a blood glucose monitor. And I believe it reads your core temperatures in real-time reports to, your data device and et cetera. And so that's a new thing for me. I wasn't aware of that. He said he's been using it for, or et cetera. I don't want to get into the details, but it's something that definitely interests me. And if I was going to be back into the game of coaching high performance, adverse condition athletes, then I would absolutely be putting one of those on me to go and see how I can break myself, learn the model, and then pass it on to my athletes. Have you seen anything out there?
Well, we just did an interview with a guy named Douglas Casa, Dr. Douglas Casa, who runs the Corey Stringer Institute at UConn, which is basically a giant heat lab. So he studies this stuff, and he has this big room where he can completely control temperature, humidity, like simulated sunlight for passive heating. He can put wind in it or not. And he trains athletes specifically for heat adaptation and does studies on them. So he does, we were talking about it, and that's what you had your guy do is what he recommends that his athletes do at home when they don't have their own fancy heat lab. Like they'll convert their closet or their bathroom or whatever into a heat room, and then they'll train. And he said it specifically, heat adaptations come after a core temp of 102 plus. In between 102, you don't want to go past like 103 and a half or so. But just above 102 for an hour, and that's where you start to see significant physiological adaptations to heat. And if you were to take a core temp doing hard exercise in the heat, just normally you're floating at around 101, 102. So that's not as bad as it might sound. But yeah, for monitoring, you're either looking at a rectal probe, or they make like ingestible Bluetooth pills that you can use that I assume are insanely expensive. But that's another way to do it. Any of the other stuff like a forehead wipey thing or the ones that go in your ear, none of those are reliable. So he said to avoid those, if you're ever wondering.
I've got a follow-on question for you on that, if you don't mind. The reason, did he give a reason as to the cutoff point in respect to generally don't go any higher than this? Was it because of free radicals, or was it
may become
collapsing?
incomprehensible.
Okay, yeah, okay, check.
So if you go too far past 104, you might not be able to get back.
Right.
But if you're at like 103.8, you can probably pull yourself right back from that with just stepping out of the room.
Right. Well, I'll say this, that there is a method to my madness when I do these kind of things, and the proof is in the pudding, as the old saying goes. And so when I had that individual do that, as a contingent, we flew down, I say my team, it wasn't my team, for Momentum Coaching, the program that I was running at the time. The athletes that were in it from Canada who went down to Austin, just outside of Austin, Texas. It was a race course called Rocky Hill Ranch, or RHR. Ran a 24-hour solo. I've raced that 24-hour solo course probably 4 or 5 times, I think. And that year, the temperature during the 24 hours, it didn't go below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, it still never went below 100 degrees. The humidity was 100% during the entire race. And so you can imagine grinding up a hill with not a whole lot of wind hitting you on your frontal. And so you're not getting that cooling effect. Well, you weren't getting the cooling effect anyway because of the humidity and the heat. But not having any wind to strip off at least the perception of heat, it was a freaking hard race. And I knew it was a hard race when the Texans were quitting. And they got a lot of pride, man. And when you're passing a Texan, like, hey, what's up? Hey, you from Canada? Yeah, I am. See you later. That's hard on someone's head. But when they're quitting, that's a big deal. So that year when the race was over, it got a bit uncomfortable because everyone that won all of the podium spots were all my team or our team. And so that's even worse for Texans when there's no Texans on the first place podium. So what it showed me was We can come from a cold country. At that time, it was pretty cold up in Canada. We can fly down, compete at a hard race under adverse conditions based on the protocols that were put in place long before the race gun went off, and execute with some conviction and dominate the battle space, as it were.
The, there's so much to pull out of that. 'Cause there is a lot of pieces that are involved in that. You guys got any thoughts? Kelly, got any thoughts on that?
Well, and Sean, you were saying, isn't anybody going to push back? My question is, because when you're working with peak performance, and I think of special forces individuals, the mindset. As a coach, did you ever have to actually pull someone back? You know how you
Lots.
said, I put in peak and then went in peak. Did you ever have anyone that their mental, like there was no stopping. They were completely, I'm going full force until I hit a brick wall. And as their coach,
That's when I know I've done a good job.
is when you're having to pull them back.
When I'm having to rein back the thoroughbred that is now in front of me. They might have shown up as a nag, but now they're a thoroughbred. You know what I mean? So that's my favorite kind of moments, when I'm having to rein them in because they just want to get after it some more. And that's the evolution of an athlete, or the evolution of life. If you're in the game, surrounded by the right people with the right conviction, you should be able to look back at yourself a year ago and think, who was that dummy? I'm doing way better now. At least that's how I run my life. Every year I look back at, who was that village idiot a year ago? That was dumb Sean. And so that's what I expect of my athletes. The high performance mindset, or the mentality of a peak performer, should be someone who always wants a little bit more, who wants to always test themselves a little bit more, who wants to see some more failures, who wants to see beyond the horizon. When they first show up, sometimes they don't even see beyond their own feet. So it's my job, in context, or in combination with them, to figure out a path forward for them at some point in the future to be more mega than I am. And that's when it's my job to start reeling them back.
And is there ever then a plateau? Okay, so that was the line, or you were going to, have a heart attack. The thoroughbred was going to have a heart attack or break a leg or something. And then you kind of rest, and then you say, okay, now we're going to get past that. When you talk about each year, you try and be a little bit better. So is there ever truly an end point?
Not for me, and not for anyone
game?
that I work with, no.
Okay.
I said it yesterday, sometimes when I'm riding, like, I'll see white dots. Like, I don't see it every single day. And it's not that my vision tunnels, it's that my peripheral stays really good. I'm totally aware. I've been doing this a long time. And so if I can push myself hard enough that I'll start to get white dots in my vision, that's when I know I'm getting pretty close to going too hard for too long. And so I'm very comfortable in the adversity of the moment because I've done it lots. And when I see white dots, sometimes I'll want to see double white dots because I want to see my left and rights of arc. As I said yesterday, I'm an old dude, and nowadays I'm driving a jalopy. If my body is the car, I'm driving a jalopy. But I've got my foot all the way to the floor, and I'm going around the corner, and I'm banging against the rails and expecting sparks to come off it because I want to drive that thing hard. I want to see what this jalopy is still capable of doing. So that's what I expect of anyone that I work with or works with me. If we're a team, I'm looking beyond the horizon. Maybe they aren't, but that's where we're going. And, as they say, pick up the pace.
That is a great point. Well done on the coffee sip. That was a solid one. Jimmy, got any thoughts on anything we've gone so far?
No, I'm just enjoying the masterclass and coaching here. So nice work.
Good one. Craig, you got anything before we move on to the next point I got?
No, the white dots thing, I think, just drives home that idea of separating pain from suffering, because I think that's one of the things that we see people develop as they become like qualified or good at becoming a special operator, is the ability to recognize those symptoms of physical fatigue or breakdown and be okay with it, and not add any emotional stress to that when they recognize those symptoms, and then just keep going into it. And those things become like not stop signs, but signposts, like things that you recognize along the way as an indicator of your physiological state, but they don't have to mean anything other than that, and they don't cause any emotional stress. And that takes a lot of time and experience of pushing yourself to those limits, seeing what happens, realizing you were okay, you probably could have done more, and then doing it again over and over and over. And it's a sign of a certain mindset and a lot of training experience when you see someone like that.
Absolutely. And Sean has a little bit of training experience.
I do, but I'm no different than any other human being in that sense. Like, before I joined the military, I was a skinny, underperforming kid, 135 pounds, and I thought I was dumb. And so through a process, that turned out not to be the case. And if not for the military, I may never have discovered myself. And because of the military, that encouraged me to go out and explore more about myself, to learn more about my mentality, to learn more about how to do better in life, how to do more in life, how to peak perform in life. I didn't think of it as peak performance. I just thought of it as a voracious appetite to do more, be more, explore more. And that got me to this point where I am now. And I don't see that changing ever. I've been doing it for so long that I look at other lives and I can't understand why they're not doing my life, because I'm the same as them. They're no different than me, other than I had the privilege of being introduced to the idea of how to become a better human being. Now, Craig is a great example of how I have become a better human being, because I bumped into the book, into building the elite book. And if not for that, I wouldn't be as rad as I am right now, whatever that means. But that book helped me. It gave me some clarity. Now, I'm not saying it changed my life, though that book could change the life for others. I'd already been in the game too long for that book to change my life. What it did do was add little bits of clarity, little bits of nuance, little bits of guidance, little bits of strategy that I could fold into my already pretty full life. And I think that's the key, man. If you're seeking peak performance, whatever that means to you, you should be so open-minded and not so concerned about whatever titles you've got that you're a constant student looking to graduate out of the school of life, as it were.
Interesting. I got a couple comments here. Just want to. Anybody else got any thoughts before I move on? Good. Okay. Just right off the bat, I wanted to hit these. Alex Bailey. Hey, how's it going? Nice to see you. Cody asks, do we each know our own personality types? I'll get into that in a minute. We'll get that at the end of there. We'll come back to that one shortly. Winterstorm says, Sean's the collective t-shirt. Drive it into the rails until you see white dots. That'll be a new one. And then John Minari put this one on. He says, in EVO, emergency vehicle operations, you take the vehicle to its limits and then just beyond, so you know the limits to your vehicle. Then after a few hours, students feel comfortable operating in that. You push the white dots and get comfortable in that zone. That's a great point. We've talked a lot about the physical side of the house in terms of, what your mind can drive your body to do. But what I'm wondering is, how does this apply to the intellectual side of the game, into the conceptual side? Because even doing this, like podcasting, it doesn't take a whole lot physically to do, right? I'm clicking a mouse and I'm moving stuff around, but I'm having to maintain a conversation, and I'm watching the comments, and I'm doing all these other things, which is putting a large cognitive stress. I can't say a large cognitive stress, which is cognitive stress. So how does the ability to manage your mentality work in the cognitive side of the house as well as the physical side of the house? Craig, I'm going to come to you to start.
I hope I haven't answered this. The first thing that came to mind was Sean's deal about trying to make his past self a year ago look dumber and weaker. Like, how do I continually improve on who I was in the past? And I have this list of notes in front of me for the topics we had today. And the first one, which is kind of the overarching thing, is just a growth mindset, which gets parroted about on the internet so much it's almost a cliche now. But it is a fundamental divider between someone's ability to improve or not. Like, if you don't fundamentally believe that you're capable of growth and improvement and development, and that effort and struggle are a necessary part of that process, then you're stuck and you're never going to change significantly. You're never really going to go anywhere. So I think that applies cognitively just as well as it does physically. If you're reading, learning, studying anything, you have to fundamentally believe that I don't know something now, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn it with effort and practice.
That's a great point. Jim, you got thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with you. I guess you said it's not that intellectually hard running a podcast. I'm gonna bet that you guys are exhausted afterwards, managing the comments, managing us, thinking of the new topics and questions, and good on you. But that doesn't come without that preparation and that work up front, like any of the physical aspects. So, meetings. If you're going into a big meeting or a big negotiation or something in your personal life, I'm going to suggest all of those processes that you would use to prep yourself for that physical activity, and that culmination of your physical prowess is going to be the same thing, or the same processes anyway that you would use for those academic or those cognitive events. So I really have a hard time distinguishing that in my mind as to the processes and how you would apply those between the cognitive and the physical.
Interesting. Kelly, thoughts?
I'm having a hard time separating and thinking strictly about cognitive because somehow it always leads to taking action. But one thing cognitively is the comments that people will make. I don't know how you do that. To your point, we'll use your podcasting example. Is there's people out there who literally cannot fathom in their mind how to handle watching comments, making sure you're being a good host, MC, interviewee, or interviewer, and managing all those tasks all at once. I think of emergency responders, first responders, military, is you've got a lot going on in the battle space or in the situation, and you're able to stay calm. And that to me is a cognitive piece. And there's people who are like, I can't do that. People who work in the ER, I couldn't handle the growth mindset. I don't think would be the right term, but the ability to handle chaos, the ability to handle multiple priorities that are constantly shifting. And to me, that's cognitive, but yet you're still having to take action. But that's where my mind went when you were talking about the mentality and how you look at things and how you view it. Because to me, there's nothing I can't do. So when people are like, well, do you want to be on this air show committee? And I had no idea what I was signing up for. I was like, sure, why not? And that experience, we had 6 months. It was our first time submitting to host a air show. And typically you don't get that first one. And they were like, hey, congratulations, we'll be here in 6 months. And we were like, oh, turd. And now after that experience, which I feel like lends towards what Sean and Craig have said too, or what all of us have said, is now I'm like, I can do anything in 6 months except make a baby. Right. Like there's nothing then that intimidates me anymore because I know how much work cognitively and physically went into that role. And therefore going forward, when people are like, can you build this event from scratch? Or do you want to, go 150 miles in a fast car or whatever it may be? I'm like, yeah, why not? Sure. Like we'll figure it out. It's not going to necessarily be perfect. I don't believe anything is perfect the first time you try it, but it's that willingness, it's the right mindset, the cognitive process of, I know I'll figure it out somehow. And I'm willing to learn and stumble and be the man in the arena.
I like that. Sean, got anything?
Yeah, two things. One is in respect to the cognitive burn rate, we'll call it the CPU burn rate, as I like to think of it. The difference between a 24-hour mountain bike course in one part of the world versus another part of the world. There's a lot of differences between two parts of the world, not just the weather, not just the water, not just the food, not just the crowd, not just the mountains, not just the sky. There's a lot of differences there. But what is different when you're out on course is if it's a technical course or it's a non-technical course. So while you're out there crushing, if you've also got to have your heads-up display that is processing all of the fuzzy math in the milliseconds that you have to keep riding technical terrain versus simple terrain. Up here in Canada, we've got a lot of tech. A lot of our 24-hour race courses are quite technical. And I've done 30 24-hour solo mountain bike races around the world. So in the United States, the courses are not as technical. And so when I'm competing down there, I find it way easier than competing up here because of all of the CPU burn rate that I have to apply on a really technical course. It's not that I don't have the skills, I do, but I've got a lot of math that I've got to do, predictive math and real-time math as I'm smashing down tech. So it's what you're facing. You may have faced 1,000 times, but that doesn't change the fact that your CPU still has a burn rate, and that burn rate has a caloric draw, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's just something to consider. I think the other piece is, could you put John Minari's comment up again, Chance, real quick?
Absolutely.
Thanks. He's talking about emergency vehicle operation. What it made me think of was I was the first Canadian to deploy down to the United States to train with Delta. At the time, we didn't formally exist as JTF2, but as a warrant officer, I got sent down there with another individual to take part in portions of the Delta selection course. As part of that, one of the pieces was to go to an undisclosed location to do some high-speed defensive driving, offensive driving, and all kinds of driving stuff and shooting and whatever. And so it started off like this. A huge freaking runway in front of me, flat as a pancake, super wide, tarmac. And as I was walking out with the two Delta guys and myself and the driving instructor, Delta recruits, we loaded into the car and he said, "Sean, you're driving first." I was like, okay, is that a privilege or is that not a privilege? And so as I sat down, I was like, man, I'm feeling the pressure. A, I'm representing Canada. B, I'm representing my team. C, I'm representing myself. D, I better freaking crack this thing out of the park. So the instructor looked over at me as I got my hands on the steering wheel and he said, "Sean, when I say go, put your foot on the floor and don't take it off until I give you further instructions." Roger that? Roger that. And so I mashed that pedal to the floor and didn't let up until we were going way faster than I was comfortable with. But my foot never came off the floor. I didn't know what my limits of the car were. I didn't know what the limits of myself were, but I do know that in the moment I was being observed, not just by the crew, but I was being observed by myself. I was running internal sequence of events, my software loop that I do on myself, my hardware loop that I do on myself, to tune into what is my mental state right now on my peak. So during that entire sequence of events, I was doing my peak mental best to control my hardware and software loops while being observed and while observing myself. It all turned out well because I'm still here. But that moment was not a moment of high physicality. It was a moment of barely doing anything other than a whole pile of this. I was sitting in a seat, holding onto a steering wheel, doing next to nothing compared to what I'd been doing half an hour prior. But it was a burn rate because I was in an uncomfortable situation that I'd never been put in before, and it was my job to freaking crack it out of the park. Mental performance doesn't require you to be on a chin-up bar while you're mentally performing. Your mental performance can have such a burn rate as you stand there observing the battle space in front of you before you take a step into it. You might already be at half capacity because you have never faced anything like that before. These are opportunities for you to tune in, hardware, software loop, internal. See how your body's doing, see how your mind is doing, see how your emotions are doing. Get in sync with the moment so that you can learn how to do it better in the future. You might not do it mega well in the moment, but that is the opportunity to do it mega well in the future by paying attention to the now.
Mic drop. Here's another one. Craig, you got anything to add on to that?
No.
No. Good to go. Okay. Kelly, any points? we're just about at time, so I'm just running down the list. See if we. What do you
Yeah,
think, Jim?
we
Got
are
any
out of
thing to
time.
add?
About that
I feel
story.
like I feel like Sean was just on a roll today, so I was
Yep.
just absorbing.
I'm
I'm
just
mentally, I'm
realizing
cognitively taking it in.
I realized I talked too much in this episode. I'm sorry.
all
No,
good.
it was all good stuff.
Yeah. We so we're just about an hour here. I have one more. I got a comment here, but I also want to. I had a little point here. I've been listening to everything you guys have been saying, and I think that at least what it boils down to, and tell me if I'm off base on this. Basically, the ability to mentally peak perform is the ability to remove preconceived ideas of capability.
Ooh. I like
Craig,
that.
what do you think? I'm gonna go down
Yeah.
the list on this.
Yeah, no, I think that'll work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
yeah, sounds
Yeah.
good.
Check. All right, Kelly, what do you think?
I concur. I
Okay.
agree. I think that was a really simple way of saying it. It's not easy, but it's simple.
Jim, what do you think?
That was 2 mic drops in a row. Well done.
All right, Sean, any thoughts on that?
Great simple sentence. The simplest sentence of all today, but the one that leaves the biggest sting if you really engage in it.
There you go. Well, I do really appreciate you guys' conversation. It has been awesome. I have one last comment I want to put up here, and then we'll do some final thoughts. Winterstorm jumps in and he says, at some point, the chaos becomes familiar and comfortable, and normal becomes slow and mundane. The issue is when you spill that over into your personal life and create chaos where none is needed. And that
Oh,
is,
how can we end on that? That was a good one, Winterstorm. Dang.
Well, let me go around the table then. Kelly, what do you think? What do you got some thoughts on that?
On the comment,
On the comment, yeah.
I think that's a very good key point to pull out is you as an individual may be able at this certain cognitive ability, mental capacity, CPU, I love that, the burn rate, whatever. But is anyone else getting second degree, third degree burns because they're not at that same place without you consciously recognizing the impact it's having on them? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Do you need to change who's around you? I'm just saying it's an interesting piece, maybe a future topic.
Maybe a future topic indeed. Craig, you got any thoughts on this comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's accurate. I think you can learn to perform well in high stress situations, and over time, I mean, it's partly an innate characteristic, but over time, you can develop a high threshold for stimuli, like where you need things to be pretty adrenaline tinged to feel alive. But for the sake of like long-term mental health and your relationships and all of that, it's also important to be able to sit quietly with your own thoughts or enjoy a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and like be okay sitting in one place. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing dopamine forever and you're going to keep making bigger messes as you do it. Especially once you leave whatever occupation you're doing that involves a lot of high stress situations.
Oh, that's a great point. Jim, you got any thoughts on this comment?
Yeah, great comment. Hits a little close to home for me. I'm in an administrative battle every day, and everything's a fight or a challenge. And yeah, making sure you know when to shut that off is very important.
Sean, any thoughts on this comment before we dive into finals?
It's a great comment. It's so insightful. And in respect to my life, I have already said it in this podcast. I like to understand my left and right of arc. I like to run my jalopy against the edge of the racetrack and see the sparks. And I actually like to run it on the other end of the spectrum and see a little bit of sparks as well, except those sparks are mindfulness. Those sparks are contemplatively making my coffee in the morning. Whether I'm being disturbed or not doesn't matter. I'm still engaged in the process of the now. When I sit down every morning, I read and contemplate not just my life, but the greater life all around us. I find moments every single day to understand my left and right of arc. And it doesn't mean that I slip into my left of arc, which is the default mode of namaste, chillax, get in touch with yourself, etc., etc. What I do is I enter into that zone and I push the freaking pace to see how mega namaste I can get. And I know that sounds bizarre because I'm taking one end of the spectrum and trying to apply it against the other end of the spectrum, but I feel that the only way that we can expand our arc of fire is to keep pushing in both directions, get mega chill and mega aggressive, however you want to term it. I think that you can explore in one aspect of getting involved in the chaos, but don't think that then you move over here and just quietly chillax the same way you've been doing for the last 30 years. Freaking push the pace on the chillax. Get mega chillax.
I feel like that's an oxymoron. How can you be mega chillax?
I found a way.
If you're trying to relax, isn't being more relaxed sleeping and in REM sleep? Like, how do you get more REM sleep?
I suppose you'll only know once you buy yourself an Oura ring and go explore.
There you go. Got to try it out, see what happens.
There you go.
I just want to hit on these because they are fantastic. Before we shut her down, we do some final thoughts. Cody jumps in. Thank you for your time, everyone. John Minari, thanks again for a great show. Dave Curvin, great panel, great topic, and as always, great learning points to take forward in the game of life. Cody hits in. I love that picture on your back wall, Kelly. Smooth seas never made a skilled sailor. Absolutely. And probably the comment of the day, Winterstorm says, no one namaste as hard as Sean. So, yes.
What a guy.
That is 100%
Winterstorm.
true. I think it's a great point. But let's get some final thoughts on everything we've talked about today. But, peak performance when in reference to mentality, and we'll go down the line. Kelly, what are some final thoughts?
Peak performance is subjective. Everyone has a different definition of what a peak performance is for them, but universally, it begins with your mindset. So going back to the quote, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. So everyone has the capacity to evaluate their own mental headspace, where they're at, their mindset, what drives them. And I challenge people just to look and see, are you doing the things that you need to do? Are you talking to yourself in your head the way that is going to help you reach your goals?
Like it. Jim, final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have a coffee cup here, but pick up the pace. Find your limit. Do it respectfully to yourself, and expand that limit. Just keep pushing it.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure you get a cup. Don't worry. I'll send one out to you. I'll make sure you have one. Craig, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think a good closeout would be related to Sean's statement that humans are complex systems or complex adaptive systems, and there's this characteristic of complex systems where equilibrium is death. In other words, like if you get stuck in one thing without variability, then you're slowly dying. And when it comes to the mental performance side of things, that applies as well. So just as Sean's saying, like it does matter how hard you can push, how hard you can drive yourself, how hard you can focus on a single thing or whatever. But it also matters how well you can disengage and relax and spend time doing something that is not intense and terrible. And performance really, especially in a sustainable way, is how far you can swing the needle in both directions and your ability to regulate that as needed to fit the situation.
I like that a lot. Well, again, I run to say thank you again, Jim. Awesome conversation. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Craig, really appreciate you being on here. Sean, as always, love talking to you. This has been a fantastic conversation, and if anybody watching still has any thoughts or comments, by all means, put them up in the comment section. We do read them even afterwards, and I'd love to hear what you guys think of mental peak performance and how you utilize your own mentality to be a peak performer or just to be a performer, because I'd like to hear both sides of it. It is fantastic. I think that really what we all need to do is learn how to be able to use our mentality so that we can then build on everything else, which allows us to grow into the people that we are meant to be. And you do that with us every day here on The Collective. See y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.